My name is Bob Rennie, and surprisingly, I am for the density. Let's get that out of the way. I'll just go through my talk and rationalize why. I was asked to speak here today on the Cambie Corridor. To me, the discussions are much broader, reaching than just the Cambie Corridor, whether we're talking about rental housing, non-market housing, or market housing stock. I think Vancouver is a little bit schizophrenic right now in that are we the least affordable place to live on the planet, or are we the best place to live on the planet? And unfortunately, I think right now the answer is yes to both. The market came to a halt in 2008. In 2007, we delivered 3,300 homes in downtown Vancouver. In 2012, we will deliver completed 493 homes in downtown Vancouver. And this will put tremendous pressure on rental rates and affordability, compounded by a very limited supply of development sites in downtown Vancouver. Our Olympics resulted in $6 billion in media exposure, rebranding Vancouver. Urban Futures projections, and I have the graphs if you'd like them. Urban Futures projections for population growth in the city of Vancouver, not Greater Vancouver, but the city of Vancouver, over the next 15 years is 97,957 people, taking us from today's 657,000 population to over 755,000 over the next 15 years. And the increase in dwellings to absorb the population growth is over 53,000 new homes, taking us from our 287,000 today to an increase of 18% of 340,000. And that's just, I just want to point out, that's just for Vancouver, and we have to decide where are these people going to live. The decisions being made here today have to take all these facts into consideration. Your decisions will impact badly needed additional property tax dollars that will just go elsewhere and are required for future generations and future councils. We are not a head office city. We do not have a huge manufacturing base, and we are not a financial center. I believe that the cost of housing is a huge deterrent to attracting offices to locate jobs here, sending jobs and office tower property taxes to other cities and provinces. And now we've seen our city do the right thing by approving an amazing job center like TELUS at Georgia and Richards, and hopefully attracting a new federal building in our downtown. Are we going to tell 40 floors of workers to commute to Langley? No, we need the jobs. Both executives and salaried workers need to live close to transportation, like the Marine and Cambie application. I believe that future studies will show a breakdown of family structure and family marriages due to the 2-hour accumulated time it takes to commute an hour each way. I'm sure that speakers before me have already established that it's very green to have more people living on less land, and that even though oil is down significantly today, that we have to become less reliant on the automobile. The Cambie Corridor is only a small part of this solution. Why is Vancouver's west side so expensive? Why is it difficult to find a home on the east side of Vancouver for less than $750,000? Because we just do not make more single-family land in our city, and we cannot do the same with density and height. I'm not advocating 40 stories from Broadway to Marine, maybe just 12th to Marine. That's what you're thinking. Seriously, not in my backyard. It's not going to work anymore. We should put strong density where it belongs, and that is adjacent to good transportation. Maybe we should look at successful models like the Joyce SkyTrain. I do have a concern that the discussions on Marine and Cambie, in fact the discussions at 25th and Cambie and the discussions at 25th and Cambie do affect the discussions at Marine and Cambie, and we should make sure that the two words Cambie Corridor is not a one-size-fits-all stations. I joked on CBC the other day that I can do a Rubik's Cube in less than 1 minute on one side, but I think we're at a point in time where we have to look at all 6 sides of the Rubik's Cube, and I do worry that, sorry, I've gotten out of hand. We have to worry about future tax dollars that come from development to pay for the ever-increasing cost to run my city, and another side of the increasing population numbers that I think are often optimistically low and do not take China and the global economy enough into consideration. And if I could ask for anything today, it's leadership from my mayor and council and the other delegations to future-proof my city the same way we did with bike lanes, the same way we did with the TELUS building. And thank you for allowing me to have a voice. Any questions?
Well timed, Mr. Rennie. You do have questions. Councillor Meigs first, and then Councillor Deal.
Well, thanks, Mr. Rennie. You gave us some pretty troubling numbers about affordability and price and so on. Given the very steep drop in the number of homes being delivered, do you have more confidence than ever you'll be able to quickly sell the village on the creek?
You know, the village brings into building form, etc. But I think the problem that we do have with the Olympic Village is the Olympic Village is built product as opposed to our addiction to pre-sales in our city, where you buy and you put a deposit down and then you worry about it in 24 to 32 months, whereas the Olympic Village you have to be ready, willing and able to buy in the next 30, 60 or 90 days, and we're still on track for a 2 to 3 year absorption of the village.
But it'll absorb.
It will absorb, yeah. It's waterfront land, and I think if you look at some of the furor that's been there over deficiencies, that everything is calming down now because they're being fixed, and there's nothing systemic.
Thank you, Councillor Meigs. Councillor Deal.
Thank you very much for coming out. And a couple of questions, because you're an expert in these things, and it's come up several times around.
Allegedly.
Yeah, you know, you have royalty apparently in your lineage on this one. When it comes to condominiums versus market rental, we've had a lot of discussion around this table and in this room about whether or not rental is more affordable than ownership, even if it's market rental. And perhaps you could discuss the difference between being able to afford market rental and being able to afford getting into the ownership market for the condos. And then the second question that's come up is the stability or lack thereof for people renting condos from recent purchasers.
You know, when we look at the completions in downtown Vancouver of 3,300, 07 dropping to 493 in 12, and we've traditionally sold 50% plus of a development to passive investors. The passive investor has been our rental supplier. It hasn't been the single asset developer such as a Victor Saton or a PCI providing a lot of rental towers. So that's where I see that there's a crisis coming on the rental front. I felt when the STIR program came in that we should have paid attention to rents under $1,250. I don't think there's a crisis at $2,500 a month rent, but there's absolute pressure on it. But, you know, are you going to bonus for people developing rental? The numbers are very difficult to make them work. I think another side we have on home ownership is if you bought a home in 1998, you saw your rental rates go down, you saw your income go up, and your house triple in price. None of that relief is coming because there's pressure on interest rates and people are buying to 100% of their ability. And I think the only way to keep affordability at the forefront is through supply.
Thank you. And perhaps just to go a little further, you may not know, you may not have an answer for this one, but for those who you'll be educated, I guess. For those who do purchase on spec and rent it out for the first while, do you have any concept of the stability? If someone's renting that place, do they have 5-year stability in that, or is there often action
buying
within
on
that first
spec?
5 years?
If we separate out Vancouver from, if we go to the suburbs, buying on spec today is if we take the Village in the pre-sale or Wall Centre Falls Creek, we're sitting with 21% deposits. So it costs a lot of money to get into the game for that investor. And if you would see out of the inventory that they buy, 25% of it they try to sell before closing if the market's moved with them. If not, after closing, if you look at the capital, there's over 300 units there, and right now there's 52 for sale. Just going through closing right now, and everybody can withstand the first month of mortgage payments, and then all of a sudden, instead of selling, I'll put it for rent. And once they stabilize with tenants, it just drops down, and they hold it for a much longer time unless there's a spike in the market.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cadman.
Sure, I just want to ask you, we've heard musings by Mr. Falcon that they've had the study come out on the HST and that they may look at removing that from real estate. What would taking that HST off of the sale of real estate do in terms of making affordable purchase more affordable and in stimulating the market?
The vote is, do we take away HST and replace it with GST and PST?
Right.
I think to wholesale take it off real estate, I don't know whether he's been misinterpreted, but I hadn't heard it. My discussions with the Minister of Housing have been that we would take away the property transfer tax, for first-time buyers and reduce it to 0, and then take it to a flat fee of 1% for all other homes, which would really stimulate housing growth. But, my concern with the HST and the vote 7 weeks away is that 700,000 people signed something. They don't know what they signed, but they signed something. And I told our Premier the other day that I believe that what we're misinterpreting as complacency with the HST is everybody is very complacent that they know it's going away. So those are my political projections. I haven't heard Minister Falcon say that he would take it away. It would certainly help. It would help if they took it away only on the Olympic Village for a year and gave us a head start, which we tried that. But I think...
Move the motion, Mr. Rennie.
Yeah, I think we have to watch if they take it away on everything, then it's all just equal again. But I would really like to see some stimulus for first-time buyers. So I can't answer it properly because I haven't heard him say it.
Okay. And I think he just put it out as one of the options that was being looked at because of the calculation that was done that the average British Columbian was paying $350 more.
$350 a year.
And I asked that because, particularly in the case of the Olympic Village, I believe all the components that went into building that Olympic Village have already paid the GST and the PST on the building.
I felt strongly that since the Olympic Village was occupied by the athletes, that the GST should either go away or have been triggered, and we should not be subject to the HST. But we had a hard time arguing that one. I didn't, but I believe that our city manager and councillors did argue that with Minister of Finance then, Colin Hanson, and it was a no, and maybe that's something we should look at. It has been occupied, which triggers GST.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anton.
Thank you. Back to the trends in investment in new condominiums. So if you have a big building, let's take downtown, 200 units. How many of those are investor purchased? Did you say about 50%?
Yeah, 50% plus. CMHC for years used 47.5%, so we all relied on that. But it's over 50%, especially in downtown.
And how many of those are now rented out? Are they most of them rented out, or some of them stay empty?
It's an interesting one. If you're looking at Cole Harbour, the Rolls-Royce stuff on the water, where we're talking 2,500 square foot units, values in excess of $1.5 million, $3 million, I would say half of them sit vacant, yet furnished, and are used by family and friends. And then as you come off the water and you get to non-view luxury locations, a little more, even though $500,000 we're calling utilitarian, I would say 90% of those are rented.
So they're purchased by investors for rental.
Passive investors. Even when we did the Eldorado at Nanaimo and Kingsway, we saw a first-time investor come off the sidelines. Mom and dad taking $75,000 to $100,000 out of the bank and just wanting to own a piece of the rock in our city. So they end up putting from 25 to 40% down so that the rent will cover the mortgage and property taxes and hopefully the maintenance.
And this is the biggest source of new rental that we have.
That is our rental supply.
Can you describe, because there's a lot of anxiety over a couple of things, flipping, like are people buying those properties and flipping them, or alternatively selling them somewhere down the road so that they turn into home ownership rather than rental?
We can get the office to pull the numbers, but I would say after 5 years that if 100 passive investors bought, that 35 to 40 are out.
So some of them, about 35 or 40% are buying them for a more middle-term investment, and others are buying them for a longer term.
If the market doubled, that number goes way up. But in a relatively stabilized market, a tenant moves and they try and put it for sale to see if it's time to get out. But when you start to look at increases and then the ensuing taxes, it's just like the big apartment owners; they tend to keep them.
Right. Because as I said earlier, I don't know if you heard me, people occasionally used to, if you had money, if you were wealthy, you might buy a small apartment building, but that's not so easy now, so people buy individual units.
They buy individual units. What they do is they have their $100,000 at a time rather than $1 million all at once. But I mean, underlying this too, if you look at Bose's project in Burnaby, I'll use Don Forsgren's Intercorp's project in Burnaby, 340 units sold. that you didn't need both hands to count the number of non-resident buyers. It's local.
It's local investors.
It's local investors, yeah.
And so I think that what you're saying is that the best way to increase affordability is to increase supply.
Yeah, maybe you should put some restrictions on size and keep some, so try and influence smaller size and affordability on transportation lines. But as far as I'm concerned, the transportation is where the density should be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Woodsworth.
How much profit is necessary for it to be worthwhile for a developer to build rental?
At today's interest rates, which there's pressure on them going up, I think it's maybe, Andrew, what would you need to see? A 6% return, all in? Yeah, I'm using profit as a return. If you invested $100 million, you would have to see $6 million net fall to the bottom line.
You would need much more than 6%.
But if you held it as rental.
You could hold it in the long run?
Yeah.
Then you'd I could.
And Mr. Grant, Mr. Grant, you really don't need to get into the details at this point in time. And Mr. Rennie, the question's to you.
Okay, there's two questions. There's one, if you're building it to sell, it's that 15 to 18% profit. If you're building it to hold, I'm just talking what you need net after all your expenses, after everything. But I'm not the rental guy.
He's the condo guy.
We just call you the wise guy, but so obviously we're all in agreement we need more rental. Aging population, who knows? There's a lot of crises in everybody's lives these days financially, except for a very, very small percentage of the population, and they're trying to get into rental because they can't enter the market to buy anything now. So I'm just trying to think of how do we. Are the developers considering lesser profits so that they can increase the rental supply?
The developers aren't building with cash, so they go to their financial institution, and the financial institution has to say if the developer goes broke, will this carry itself? So it's just arithmetic. But, if you want to provide rental, do you bonus one FSR of density on every site that stays rental in perpetuity? But I think the problem, if we go with STIR and rental, and I met with Randy Hilton of West End Neighbourhood Association, and I have to tell you, I started out saying I will turn him from really, really hating me into only hating me. The problem is they realize that they're on $200 to $250 land. So in order to get enough of a return, you have to put so much density on it. Yet if you start to go out to other areas, like the 900 block East Hastings, where we just saw land sell under $50 a buildable, it's easier to create rental stock. But then does a large landowner or asset holder want to own rental in the 900 block East Hastings? So maybe it's incentivizing the developer in those areas where you don't have to give as much density to put a couple floors in.
Okay. Secondly, when I look at Marine Landing, really tall towers. Certainly your choices in Chinatown were to keep it low, keep the character. I don't see that in this community, and I'm wondering if you can comment on just the form of...
I think if you look at Chinatown, it's very, very sensitive. It's your grandmother. I mean, there's only so much that they can absorb. But when you look at the edge of the city at Marine and Cambie, and maybe not unlike the Joyce SkyTrain station, that's an area that is going through redevelopment, and you've got such great mixed use there, and it's right on the SkyTrain. If we're going to put it anywhere, and we're so used to doing this downtown, so we're all pioneering. Brent is taking on a huge amount of the city all at once, and I'm very cautious that it's not a one-size-fits-all. That would you put that tower at 25th and Cambie? Probably not. But at Marine in Cambie, where you're building a new hub, I think absolutely it will be able to absorb it. And when I go through these numbers, I think we have to start future-proofing now, because I don't think we want to put up 12 stories and then get out of bed and go, oh, we needed more. And I think we have to get way ahead of ourselves, especially when the rest of the world's in trouble. They're coming here.
And finally, just the challenge to design something that's interesting. Say, maybe even Cambie in Quebec, we've got some interesting things. I don't see it here. I don't see this is a huge development. It's high. It's shocking in its size, but I don't see architecturally anything that's really grabbing me.
The problem is everybody's taking a hit at Vancouver architecture right now, and I see a new development coming up on Main Street where the architect says he's reinvented the wheel. And you know, when Robert A.M. Stern came to town, he said one of these buildings in isolation is beautiful, but in accumulation they're mediocre. And I think he's full of shit. I think that 25 years from now, we are going to stand so proud of this fabric of Vancouver. It is a very definable fabric, but we've become bored because we're locals. It is a very, very special fabric, and I think this is a part of it. And you know, there's heavy restrictions on what to do. If we said that height was no object, that building form would change. But the density is there, and you have to play within it. I think it's a very smart-looking development.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. That is the time for Councillor Woodsworth. Thank you for coming today and gracing us with your presence as the Condo King. I just have one question for you. How do you justify, as the King, that the Queen Elizabeth I was against growth? You weren't here for Tony Astle's comment earlier, but it's an inside joke.
I think they owned all the land.
Oh, yes, it could be.
And they wanted to see the rents go up. Councillor Anton.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie.